Welcome to my channel. In July, I started my own coloring challenge to color in mythographic books and also to use mostly paints if paper allows it, if picture allows it. I really wanted to use more watercolors and especially more gouache paints. I started to work in Mythographic Paradise. It's a book where I probably have the biggest amount of finished pictures so far, and I decided that a couple of more finished projects it will be a good additions. In July, I also participate in Ukrainian color along, color with Ukraine. July theme it's beach, so this picture with beach scene it's a perfect choice. But when I looked carefully at this page, I realized that it's less a romantic place and more like place where we definitely need to call ecological activists, because the whole beach was covered by those hidden objects. Here we have a lost sneaker, strange brooms, carton packages and other things which definitely didn't add nice touch to the romantic atmosphere. I really wanted to cover all those hidden objects. Yes, it's a problem with those yearly mythographic editions, and again I am very happy that in the latest books we don't have such a problem, such a challenge to cover all those hidden objects. So I decided that gouache will be my main media for doing the background here. Gouache is opaque paint, so it's perfect for masking, but I must confess that my skills with gouache is very limited. I love gouache paints, especially because of their matte finish and that they are quite opaque, but for me it's a little bit difficult to work with them, so I decided that it will be a very good practice here. When I was a child, gouache was probably the most popular medium to use in schools during art classes, but well, for me it always was a very mystery medium. I never learned how to use it properly because somehow we never learned how to mix colors. Usually gouache it's manufactured with primary colors, very bright colors, and I never learned how to get more muted, more pastel colors. And only now, when in shops we have already pre-mixed pastel or muted colors, or where I started to experiment a little bit with mixing, blending colors, I started to grasp this media a little bit better. Also, for me, a little bit difficult to get amount of water which I need to use here. I really love that creamy texture of gouache, and I love this texture because of its opacity. But if my paper is dry and if my brush is dry, it was difficult to blend colors on paper. If I added more water, gouache started to look like watercolor and lost its opacity. It was easier to control paint, especially when I colored around all those intricate objects like glasses or birds, but I didn't like the transparency of the paint. So that's where I struggled, how much water I needed and how quickly I had to work. All gouache colors which I selected, I posted in the beginning of the video. I wanted to make impression of the evening sky, so I tried to do gradient from yellow into a light pink or light peach color, and then through orange to intense madder magenta color on top part of the sky. Later, when I looked at my sky and I noticed areas where it was difficult for me to get a smooth gradient, mostly because I also had to hide objects and to color around all those glasses, I decided that such areas where I wasn't happy with color blending, I can mask by adding additional clouds. I hope that if I do a few more pictures with gouache background, I will learn better how much water I need to use and how it's better to blend paints, because I saw several master classes where people blend paints to create smooth gradient just on paper. Yes, they use a lot of paint to get a nice layer of paints, and then with soft brush with moderate amount of water they blended it perfectly on paper. For me it wasn't the best method here, because again background areas are quite small and you need to color around pre-printed objects. But I think that for the first try it wasn't very ugly background, and I knew that this gouache background is just underpaint, and on top I planned to work with pencils. And that's where my second problem started. I selected gouache paints from my stash, and I own gouache from several brands. And I was quite surprised that even if they look equally matte and opaque when they dried, they behaved differently with pencils. So on several gouache brands it was totally possible to use pencils on top, and several brands, well, didn't want to accept pencil pigment. So I had to search through all my stash of pencils. Sometimes it was better to use Prismacolor pencils, sometimes polychromoses work better, and sometimes even pencils like Sucolor. And yes, it mostly depended from gouache brand which I used. So I really need to experiment more which one of my paints allows me to work with pencils on top. Apart from these small problems, which actually wasn't very difficult, and I think that I managed to resolve them during my coloring, the rest it was quite pleasurable coloring. I really love the atmosphere of this page. Maybe I was struggling a little bit with the water inside of those glasses. That's because I wasn't able to decide what to do. To do the ocean water inside of glasses, or maybe to do some kind of champagne with bubbles. So I changed my mind during coloring, so that's why glasses in the end they looked a little bit strange. But I'm very happy that at least I started to use gouache paints. You know why I also love gouache? Because they are also quite economical paints. First, they initially are cheaper, at least in my country, comparing to acrylic paints. And also, sometimes I purchase some lovely colors of acrylic paints. I use them maybe once a year for the background, and next time I open the same paint only maybe the next year, and you guess acrylic paint already could be dried. And if acrylic paint is already dried, you can't revive it, you can't reactivate it. With gouache it's totally different thing. Even with my oldest paint I can add couple of drops of water, and in 2 days I again have this nice creamy paint. So they are much long lasting paints, and yes, it's very convenient if you don't use your paints very frequently for coloring. And finally, this page reminded me about another thing, that almost each coloring, especially when you use paints, goes through ugly stage. For me it happens every time when I use paints or other art supplies where I am not very confident, not very familiar. I look at my initial layer of paints and I think that page looks so ugly. I won't be able to do anything decent from it. But then with time, maybe making a 1 day break and returning and looking at it with new eyes, you can see that it's perfectly savable with another layer of paint, or maybe with a layer of pencils on top of paint. It's totally possible to correct areas where you are not very happy, to intensify shadows, to add additional color accents to the areas where you thought that picture looks too flat, too boring. That's what happened for me here. When I applied first paint to the sky and first paint to the sand and water, it looked really terrible. On the water and on the sand, it lacked shadows, it lacked texture. On the sky, there were ugly areas where I didn't blend colors properly. But then I added shadows on the sky and wave to the sand and waves on the water using pencils. Sky I saved a little bit by adding gouache clouds. Soon I reminded myself that it's very important not to be discouraged, not to abandon your project through the process, and maybe the best thing is to make a break and then to return and to finish your page. I definitely intend to continue my challenge and to use watercolor, gouache and acrylic paints in mythographic books, so I hope that you will follow me for my future colorings.